Uh, Glad you could join me from Finland, UK, New Mexico, France, Florida, Spain, Manitoba, uh, all over the place. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here, I am Shelley Pryor. I am a realistic watercolorist from Ontario, Canada, and every week at this time, I do a live stream. So 10 o'clock Eastern Time, that's Toronto time. And today we're going to be talking about doing lace. I was thinking about Valentine's being right around the corner, and I've done quite a few Valentine's themed type of demonstrations. I didn't want to get too cliche, but I was thinking what would fit into that theme, and today, so I've chosen lace. Let's take a look at some of the demos that I've done in the past, or not so much a demo as a some of the other work I've done. So this is a painting that I did some time ago. What I'd like you to notice about this is that there's color in all the shadows. And that, I think, is a very important clue here when you're painting lace. Lace is supposed to be very delicate and so on. If you do all of your shadows with a gray, it tends to look quite flat looking, a little bit lifeless. So I'm going to inject a little bit of color into this painting. So that's one example. Today we're going to be painting. Here's my lace right here. So this is like this is just a dollar store lace, but it is what they call cut work lace, and it is, or Battenberg, I guess they call it. So where, it's parts of it are fabric and parts of it are sort of cut out and laced together with threads and things like that. So this is the type of thing. You may have some doilies from your grandparents or something like that. These kinds of things are what I enjoy putting into my still lifes. I was thinking about doing a rose on lace, but I didn't happen to have a rose. Not yet, anyway. We shall see. And here's the sample of what we're going to be doing. There is a link to this reference picture, and it is in the description underneath this video. So you are welcome to do that. So when you first look at lace, you think, oh my goodness, look at all that. Look at all the intricacy, look at all the pattern to it and everything else. And it can feel a little bit overwhelming. So here's what I'm doing. I'm using I printed this out on regular copy paper, the size that I need to work. And then I used some gray graphite paper, which I dark side down, I slid it underneath. And I didn't trace everything. First of all, let me just clarify that. I don't trace every single solitary thing. You're going to end up with a whole bunch of lines showing in your finished painting because graphite lines tend not to disappear. Now, I do have a video on how to transfer using your own homemade graphite paper, which is erasable. So you can lighten it up if you need to. This one's a commercial grade graphite paper. It is gray, not black. And so it will transfer lightly, almost as if you just drew it with pencil. In any case, if you draw by hand, and I do encourage drawing by hand if you have the time to do it and you are, fairly competent with your drawing skills, draw it by hand if you can. I think it helps you to understand your subject a little better before you actually pick up a brush and start painting with it. So there's a big benefit to it. You'll become familiar with it before you even start to paint. But if you are short on time, as I was today, I just transferred it this way. So one thing before I've got it taped at the top, only at the top, so it's like a book, you see, or a pad. So you'll see that I marked all around where the paper, or all around the edges of the paper, on the tape, just on the tape, not on my painting. And that'll allow me, in case I forgot to trace something, or if if I need to check something, you know, I got a little lost in the process or something like that, I can come back, I can double back and check, just line it up with those lines again, stick the graphite paper under again, and transfer what I need to use. So you can transfer with, like I use a stylus for this tracing process. Some people will use a pen so that they can see where they've been, but then you might want a new printout for actually working from, because your color copy will obviously have a bunch of lines on it. But yeah, those are a couple of different options you can take in order to get an accurate image onto your paper. And sorry, that was kind of noisy. Renee's asking, how do I choose the color to put in the shadow of my lace? I'm going to use a variety of color, and we'll get into that as we get into the painting process. So I will often start my painting with a little bit of a ghost version. And if you've watched my demos in the past, you'll understand what I mean by this ghost version. It's a very pale version of what I want to end up with, but it gives me a little bit of a map to go on as I'm working. So I'm going to use a small round brush, or this one's a squirrel hair brush. And I know that the holes in the lace, I set this up in the bathroom, has a dark marble type countertop. So I put it on top of that, and the lace holes look very prominent, more so than I did on this one. You can see that this is white on white. But if you really want your lace pattern to be a prominent part of your process, you might want to put it on something dark. And it could be red, blue, purple, whatever you want it to be, but it's going to be darker than your lace. So I have pre-soaked all of my paint here before I started, and it is... all my paint is now softened up on my palette as I go. And I'm just going to take something like, I'm going to use, I think, a neutral tint in here. Neutral tint is a nice sort of warm gray, if you will. It can vary from brand to brand because it's a mixture, and different companies make different formulas. But I just need to sort out where are the holes first of all. So I'm going to put, it's obviously not as dark as I need it. There's a reason I don't want to go as dark as it is ultimately going to be. And that's because if I go really dark and then I try to put shading on that white lace, what's going to happen is the paint's going to run. And then I will have, it's that really dark color blending into my nice white lace. I think I forgot to trace a line there. Okay, so we'll improvise a little bit. It is very easy to miss tracing a line, so for that reason I do put those registration marks on there so that I can line it up again. And so I just actually took this picture this morning. The reference, as I said, is in the description below. But feel free to set up your own still life. If you do set up your own lace still life, I really recommend having the light sort of to one side so that you can see the dimensionality of the lace. You can see the shadows a little better. If you have a light right above it, it'll fill in too many of the shadows. So I had window coming in from the side. It's morning here, so the light was coming in from the side, and it allows for a little bit more height, if you will, to the lace. Otherwise, it can look like those paper cutout doilies. It'll look like lace, but it will look flatter. So you'll show more shadows, which is, of course, what makes it much more appealing in my opinion. Now these are a lighter version of what I'm going to end up doing. So I'm not too concerned about like introducing a whole bunch of color or anything into these spaces. I'm looking for more color in the actual lace itself. The reason I'm doing these darks at the very beginning is because lace is complicated. It takes a little bit of thinking to sort out which line belongs to what. So this helps me to sort of get my bearings and helps me to sort of visualize a little better. And if I have something a little bit darker on my page, then I tend not to make my first washes overly light, which I do have a tendency to do, and you probably do as well. Brazenheart is asking, Shelley, how does your ghost version differ from an underpainting? That's actually an excellent question. My ghost version is not really designed to influence the colors of what's being put on top. It's basically just a map for me. It is very similar in many ways to an underpainting, but sometimes an underpainting, for example, if I am doing, let's say, a yellow flower of some kind, right? And I want to have the shadows established, so I might underpaint the shadow areas with a very pale purple or something, because I know that when I am painting the yellow on top, that the yellow will be influenced by the purple and give the illusion of the shadow. So this is a little bit more elementary, I guess, where you are just sorting out the lights and darks, not necessarily trying to influence the colors that are going to go on top, if that makes sense. But yeah, they can be quite similar in many ways. Some underpaintings can be done with, if you were an oil painter, for example, you might underpaint with a sepia, or you might underpaint with a gray of some kind, like a grisaille type of thing, and that helps to establish the shadows. This is a very high contrast type of thing. There's a lot of lines involved, so the whole idea here is to sort the lights and darks from each other, and just so I don't get confused. Now, I'll do the same sort of process if I am painting something complicated, like, for example, crystal. You get a lot of different facets and highlights and shadows when you are painting crystal. And my goodness, when you have your drawing done, the number of lines can be overwhelming. So I guess that's what I'm doing here, is I'm trying to sort out what's what in terms of what's lace, what's shell, what is the counter underneath the lace, that sort of thing. I'm just trying to separate the objects. We finally have, it's not sunny, but it's warm enough that the icicles are finally melting here. We have had like one of the coldest winters we've had in a very long time here. It has been, plenty of snow, lots of shoveling, lots of cold temperatures all winter so far here in southern Ontario and much of Ontario. And much of the U.S. as well, as I understand. There's been a lot of big storms and whatnot. So it's kind of nice to be thinking, oh, Valentine's is almost here, which means spring is around the corner. I'm always happy to see that. By the way, if you're looking for something specifically Valentine's themed, I do have a number of different Valentine's type of themed things like chocolates and stuff like that in my previous live stream demos. And they are on my, if you look on my channel, Shelley Pryor Fine Art, you can look under the tab that says live, and it'll show you all my previous live streams. I also have a listing, which I do need to update. I know it's sorely behind. On my website, I have a page called Free Online Demos, and I have a number of listings there. I do need to update that. I don't have the most recent ones, but there's actually literally hundreds there for you. So you are most welcome to take a look at those and paint along with any of those. Now, because this is kind of zoomed in, I don't have to make all my edges really perfect or anything like that. You know, if it's a little lumpy, I mean, I think this is dollar store lace, and so it's not like the finest in the world, but it's still pretty. So I use it for my close-ups, my still lifes. You can get as creative as you want, what you put with it. I've done lace with pearls and shells and flowers, various other things. And the process is long. Like I'm not gonna, sugarcoat it. It is kind of a long process painting in all these holes. But one thing you'll notice is that I'm not doing is I didn't use any masking fluid. Very often people will look at lace and they'll say, oh my goodness, you're going to have to go through a ton of masking fluid to paint that. And I seldom use masking fluid when I'm painting lace, which may seem surprising, but I don't really, it is mostly white, so it's more the darks I have to paint than the lights. The lights are already there. It's the white of the paper. So as I'm filling in these little holes here, I'm making sure that my paint is fluid enough, and then my brush is full as I'm painting these. It prevents the inevitable brush marks if I've got my brush full, because all that wet color melts together and fills in any brush marks. If your brush is always too dry, if that's something that you've always struggled with a little bit, try filling up your brush more and keep it full as you're painting. Don't spread it out as you go. Now, as I mentioned, this is a very dark countertop underneath. I'm not worried about getting a lot of color into here. I should have started over here because I don't want to put my hand in wet paint, so I may have to stop and try this. I'm notorious for it. But at least you'll know that you're not watching AI. And I'm sure some of you tune in just to see what kind of a blooper I'm going to do today. Last week I forgot to turn off my camera. So sometimes I forget to turn on my camera. It's not that I forget, it's just I think I've hit it and I haven't. And I have started videos where I've been talking for 10 minutes before I realize, oh, I'm not here. I haven't gone live yet. Or I haven't signed off yet. One thing I do often get, speaking of AI, is that I often will get some confusion when I post on my Instagram account. And if you don't follow that, feel free to look that one up. It's Shelley Pryor Fine Art. And if I post something, because I'm a realistic painter, it often gets mistaken as AI. AI generated, because the AI generated images, I'm seeing it more and more that are being labeled as watercolor, but they are AI generated watercolor, or they are watercolors that are done on a digital screen using, watercolor filters or watercolor brushes, things like that. They have different tools for creating. And I'm not saying that they're not originals or that they're not watercolor, but the problem is that everybody's posting nowadays and just calling it watercolor. Now, for most people, it's very difficult for them to see, especially in an online format, what's the difference between a handmade watercolor and a digitalized watercolor, something that is done with AI tools of different sorts, digital brushes. It's done on, basically created on a screen. So what I am starting to do nowadays, and I hope I can get more people sort of to get on board with this, is I am painting, or when I'm posting something, I'm calling it watercolor on paper. So I hope you'll join me. If you are post something on Facebook, on Instagram, whatever, wherever, make sure you are mentioning that it is watercolor on paper. I don't think watercolor on paper is going to be mistaken for AI, because that's just not how it's described. There's even websites that are just trying to get followers by saying, "Oh, it's watercolor by Joe Schmo," and Joe Schmo doesn't even exist, right? So that's intentionally deceiving. So I would mark all of your watercolors as being watercolor on paper, for the uneducated who do not really know that there's a difference, or where the difference might be confusing. So, and I have turned my piece sideways so I don't put my hand in wet color, but I've also turned my reference sideways so that I can fill this in. And I know this could take a long time for me to do, but and I may not finish every bit of the lace today, but I will give you enough of a demonstration that you'll be able to sort of carry on, because once you kind of know the process, you can continue along and build it up to the right values and continue along in the same process throughout the whole painting. I'm choosing neutral tint here, mostly because it's a softer gray. It's not going to end up too dark on me. It's fairly transparent, and so therefore, there's still some light that comes through the color. All right, I'm getting there. I'm almost there. Not a little bit more. But I want to get enough on here that you can sort of visualize the way that I visualize as I'm working. You can already tell that I'm painting lace, and that makes it a lot easier. It's like when you're painting a portrait and it doesn't feel right, and it doesn't feel right, and it doesn't feel right because you haven't got the eyes on yet. And so I like to work kind of the whole painting all at once. I've mentioned that before. It helps me to find the correct balance between lights and darks, values basically, which is more important than the color. And you'll see I'm going to take a little bit of artistic license with color here. Not so far. This is kind of a little bit boring, but I'll just get these other big pieces in here, and then I'll start to paint some of the lace parts. So I am painting a dark area here. My next step is going to be establishing shadows. A lot of times people see all the texture and detail and the threads and all of that sort of thing, And that's where they go first. You know, a lot of people think that snow is similar, where you just leave the white of the paper, but it's surprising how much color is actually in white. And I think that that almost separates the people who have learned to visualize from those that haven't. You can see color even though it's really, really subtle. I learned over the years that if I hunt for color and put color into my paintings, they seem a lot more lively, a lot more, they have more glow to them. And I have to almost exaggerate a little bit. There's a lot of little tiny holes in here too, which I'm not going to worry about just yet. Just going to worry about the big ones here. This is, in my mind, now this is just me. There's many ways of approaching things, but in the way that I work, I find that this just keeps me sorted. It feels like I'm less lost as I'm painting. We all get to a point in our painting where we feel like, this doesn't look right. We've all been there, right? This doesn't look right. And it's hard to pinpoint what it is when you've only got one little area done. So I do find that it's much more helpful when there's when you've worked the whole picture. So okay, you guys are answering questions for me. That's wonderful. Where can I find that brush, please? I can't find it in squirrel, only synthetic. This is a Baya elk, and it is, I think I got this, where did I get this? I think I got it from AliExpress, but I have seen them elsewhere. So, I mean, you can, maybe if you just Google Baya elk watercolor, this is a travel brush, by the way. The handle comes off, and you can kind of put it on the end so that it protects the bristles. But okay, so there's all the big lacy holes. There is other segments that have smaller holes, but I'm just going to dry this. I can already see the main pattern of the lace here. Next question is there any reason why some holes have a darker value? Yeah, reflected light. If there's a little ripple in the lace, or are you talking about the ones that I've done? Some of them just ended up that way. They're all going to end up a lot darker. So there's no particular reason why why some might look a little darker than others. Probably I just picked up a brush load. Like this one looks maybe a little darker than this one, but I mean, we're splitting hairs here. And it's not going to matter in the end, because I'm going to come back and revisit these. Now remember, what I said at the beginning is the reason I didn't go really dark with heavy color in here is because the heavy color, as I'm working up against those edges and in between these, I don't want that color to run. So this is basically just a roadmap, I guess, if you will, for where I can go from here. And you'll know this is an original Shelley prior, because as usual, I put the watermark at the very top upside down. Oh, it's like something I do every time. I don't know why. Anne says, oh my God, I don't think I'll ever have the patience to do this. And you're quite right, actually. There's many people who don't have the patience for this type of thing. I had somebody once look at one of my photos. I don't know if I have it nearby. I don't think I do. But one of my photos had a lace curtain on it. and they're going through the photos, like trying to pick something to work from. And this particular one had the lace curtain. They loved the picture, but the lace curtain was overwhelming, so they tossed it aside. I said, hold on. And I illustrated a way of doing it simpler. So if I get a little time at the end, I'll show you sort of the shortcut version of how I might handle that more in a more loose type of style. But I think many of you are here to learn how to do the realism. That is kind of my shtick, if you will. And so I'm showing you how my process is. A lot of the things I demonstrate, I post things and people will say to me, oh my goodness, can you do that as a Wednesday morning demo? Well, if Wednesday morning demos were like 3 days long, I might be able to show it. But since they're not, I have to show like a very short Reader's Digest version, if you will. Okay, so this is dried, it's cooled off. And I want to identify where the shadows are. So there's some obvious ones. We've got this big one over here, right? That's kind of a fold in the lace. We've definitely got the side of the shell and the shadow that the shell casts. Say that 10 times fast. The shadow that the shell casts. Then you've got smaller shadows. Okay, so like you got these little ones in here, all these little sort of micro shadows, if you will. A little shadow here and so on. And so that gives you that little bit of a ruffly lace, like natural lace looking element. So most of these shadows are very soft. There's no crisp edges, which means that I'll be working on a wet surface. And I'm going to go to a larger brush for this. So I'm going to use some clean water. Let's get my paint prepared first. Now, as I said, I'd like to, for the most part, stay away from the grays, the boring grays that are in the reference. So I'm going to go, I could use that neutral tint, but instead of just using it straight, I'm going to introduce some color to it. So I'll take some cerulean blue, right? So I make a dull blue. Slide this over a little bit more. So I can make a dull blue. I'm going to take some more over here. And I'm going to put a little permanent rose into this one. Now I won't do the same with yellow, like there's primary colors. I've got a blue and a red, but I'm not going to have a lot in the not in the shadows anyway. I'm not going to have a lot of that neutral color. All right, so I've got dull blue, dull red. Now, okay, when I say I'm going to use color in the shadows, I don't mean I'm going to use pure color. It has to be toned down so that it's not really bright. But I'm going to take, let me take an even bigger brush just for wetting. I'll take an even bigger brush. And I'm going to wet this whole section here. Way beyond where I'm going to put that shadow. Because you know how paint travels on a wet surface. I'll end up with a watermark somewhere if I just stopped the water there. So I'm going to come along the top here. If it's spreading too far, it's very likely that your brush is too full, this puddle might be too thick, like too rich, if you will. Now I'm going to blend that down into this reddish, pinkish color here. So I'm going to have more than just gray in my shadows. It's going to be a lot more appealing as a painting if I use color rather than using grays. That's my personal opinion. I mean, you can disagree if you wish, but my personal opinion is that a painting feels more appealing when it isn't colorless. All right, so it's spreading more than I want, so I'm taking a blotted brush and I'm just running it along that edge to kind of like hold back the tide, if you will. And that's going to be a very soft edge there. Clean brush again. I'm going to do just the shading on the shell. And I'll do the whole shell because otherwise, again, I will have a watermark. If you want a real rounded shape, you know, a curved, gentle curve, work on paper that's a little bit wetter. If you want more control, like fine little lines, which I'll show you shortly, you may want to wait until a little bit of the water soaks in a bit, not have such a wet brush, that sort of thing. But I'm going to make a little mixture here. Now it's really spreading a lot, which means I can blot my brush and bring that back into control. Drop in a little more color at that far right side, and then we can start to see a little bit of the curvature of this shell. And this shell actually looks a little bit more it's a little bit creamier in color than the lace itself. So we're talking white on white here. I'm going to use a little raw sienna. Raw, not burnt. Raw sienna. If I take a little of that purpley color in there, I can take the yellowy aspect out of it. Some brands tend to be a little bit more yellow than others. This is the ones I'm using here is Da Vinci. You may not have that in the country or location that you're in, but I've been using Da Vinci for a while. So you can see this is giving me a creamy color without it actually being yellow. So now I have to clean up these little edges. I didn't go all the way to the edges with the water, but I'm able to get that sort of creamy look. I'm not taking it over into the shadow area because the shadow area as the complement, we've got kind of a golden yellow color here, and then we've got kind of a purple color on the shadow. And if I combine those two, if I overlap them, paint one on top of another, I'm liable to get a very unpleasant color. They will sort of cancel each other out and so on. So now I'm going to blot my brush and pull down some of the little ribs in the shell. Subtle. And I'm doing this while this is still wet because that gives it a much gentler line. It won't look like it's a striped shell. It will look like the contours of the shell, like the ins and outs of those little ribs. Okay, my brush is too wet. I can feel it kind of spreading too far as I'm putting it on. So I have to go with, I'm going to the edge of my color here, so it's not like this is the wettest part right here, And if I go right to the edge where the paint's not quite as drippy or runny, I will have more control. If you don't get it all done, you can always let it dry completely and then re-wet this area and reapply. Or continue if you didn't get it all done. Okay, so we have a reasonably contoured shell complete with the ribbing, okay? And there's, I can come in after this is dry and add more details if I want, but it gives me that sort of ghost version of what I want to end up with. It gives me an idea. I know where the lines belong. I know the light from the dark, all of that sort of thing. I think it's pretty important. Yeah, and it doesn't, in terms of brushes, some of you are talking about the brushes that I use. I have tried different brands, and I haven't found them all to be all that different from each other. Not that much. And so, the type of hair is the more important part. This is a squirrel hair. It's very soft, and, as mentioned, you can bend it when it's wet and it stays sort of flopped over that way. And here's why I used to hate these kind of brushes because they would flop and they wouldn't spring back. But what I've discovered over the years is that with watercolor, use a light touch. There's no reason to sort of press down on the brush and drag it along the surface. That actually roughens up, and it's a paper surface. So if you're dragging things across it while it's wet, you can actually damage your paper. So you want something that's going to be soft on the paper. And I'm always using, it took me a while, but I've learned to use a very light touch with my watercolors. That light touch is something that helps me to achieve the softness that I'm looking for. I've got a little bit, you see there's a little spot up here. Let me zoom in. So this is a learning opportunity, shall we say? Okay. So you see there's a little spot. I didn't wet it, so the paint didn't go there. So I'm going to take a little bit of sort of matching color here, and I'm going to paint right in that spot. Not going to go overlap it or anything like that, but I'm going to paint carefully inside of that little section. Paint inside of that. Let's take I'm just going to blot it so that I can match up the value as closely as possible. And so that is, for me, one of the easiest solutions to that issue. If you've forgotten a spot, too many times people try to cover it up by redoing the whole thing, and it ends up twice as dark here and only half as dark there. So get it to the same value. If you need to darken it further, you certainly can, but I would do that first. Now, as I was over there, I realized there's still some wet color on my tape. I'm going to wipe that off. Okay, and while I'm zoomed in, here's another little spot right at the top of the shell here. I want to get that filled in, similar, as close as I can to the rest of the shell, and I'm taking a little bit less on my brush because it's a tight spot. And I'm just going to quickly dry this because I want to work around this shell and I don't want it to bleed into the shell. Karen says, sorry I'm late. Sleeping in seemed like a good idea until I realized it was Wednesday. Well, I hope you brought a note. All right, there we go. So didn't take much to dry that. It's just a small area. But I want to get, I can move back over a bit. Okay, so I want to look at this dominant shadow right here to the right of the shell. It's a cooler color. Like I see this feels creamy. This feels more blue. So I'm going to go more blue in this area, but I'm going to dampen it first because I want it soft. Clean water here. Now currently it's like super wet. Let's even it out. Make sure it's not like extra wet up here and only a little bit wet down here. I want it kind of even. And we'll see how much shine there is on that. See, it's just got a little shimmer. That's the perfect, to me, that's the perfect amount of water moisture. I think it does need to be a little bit, looked a little drier down here, so I'm going to add a little bit more water there. And I'm going to go to my bluish mixture. It's pretty close in value. It's a different color, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's a lot darker than the shell itself. It is, after all, white on white. Now I'm going to take a little bit of my reddish mixture here, neutral tint mixed with some red. And I want to use some of that as well. And I'm letting them sort of mingle on the paper. And there's a kind of a diagonal shadow here that goes up the side. So I want to have a line. I don't want that to spread out too much. So I'll blot my brush, right? Rinse it off and make sure it's clean. And I'm going to get back, like kind of hold back anything that's traveling where I don't want it. And I'll have to keep an eye on that because that's going to want to travel and continue traveling whether I want it to or not. So there we have like color rather than gray. So basically what I've done is I've taken color and I've assigned a value to it. I'm trying to match how dark it is, not match the color. I've got a little bit of a harder line here, so I can soften this one up too. Okay, and so now I have a nice colorful shadow right there. So long story short, let's dampen some of this other area. I'm going to use the wider bands first as an example. Find a few places where I can drop in a few random, and this, you know, when it gets to these little ruffles in the lace, I wouldn't worry about being too, like, matching it up too much. When it's a major fold like this one, yeah, go ahead and do that, but not so much with these smaller little puckers, I guess, in the lace. When you're working wet on wet, obviously those are a little bit trickier to control, as you all know. And I'm just going to sort of skim around, moving from place to place and adding some of this in. Just kind of touching the paper. If it doesn't blend, it might be because I missed a spot. So I just blot my brush and help it along. So I'm using kind of a combination of that, the blue mixture, the cerulean blue mixed with neutral tint. That's not the only colors you need to use. I mean, you can make these purples, you can make these, you can make it green if you want to. I mean, you can do any color you want. I wouldn't use bright colors, but I would use color rather than gray. Okay, so Diane's asking, the squirrel blend is what I'm looking for exactly fur, hair, and fur. What braid tutorial? Oh, that braid tutorial made it click for me. I'm trying to be intentional with what brushes I acquire. Very good. In the braid tutorial, last week I had been doing some, well, actually the last couple of weeks I've been doing some portrait type of paintings. And I have a listing of all kinds of different tutorials related to portraits and things. Those are listed underneath the video. Okay, I'm working on the sort of wider bands of the lace here. There is one other thing that I should probably mention, and that is that when I start a painting, and this applies to lace, applies to pretty much anything I paint, I'm usually doing the wettest areas, like the most wet on wet technique, I'm doing at the start of the painting. It feels the most out of control, as you all know, and but I don't want to be doing this after I have already put some detail on there. So I really need to make sure that I'm not obliterating detail that I've gone into. So this feels very strange when you're doing it, I guess, but it will, in the end, kind of radiate through any of the detail you end up putting on top. So it kind of is important to do this because you don't want to be, putting a wet wash over top of detail that you've done in case you start, moving the paint where you don't want it move to. So I'm just kind of alternating back and forth and letting these pinks and blues overlap. I feel that it just gives a little bit more life to these areas in the lace. Now, some of this I'm just kind of dabbling in. And again, if it feels like, that created too hard of a line, you can blot your brush, clean brush, and just give it a slight tickle to get that blended in. Sometimes, it depends on your situation. It might dry quick if you're, if it's the middle of winter and your furnace is blasting away and it's very dry or something. You have dry heat maybe. Electric heat can be like that. So you can still adapt the wetness of your paper surface as you're going along. The trick is just don't let those areas dry with the hard line. So you're kind of avoiding the hard lines as you're going along. Anyway, so you're seeing that it looks kind of strange at this stage. As we come in and start doing some of the details, things will come together. But it always has that, there's always the ugly stage, or the stage where things just don't look right. It may not look necessarily ugly, it just doesn't look right somehow. I feel like the picture that you're seeing here is a little dark. Let me see if I can bring the light over a little closer. Maybe that'll help and make this feel a little bit brighter. I could go adjusting cameras and things like that, which probably is camera, but this will give you a little bit more light perhaps. And there we go. So we've got some shadows established. I feel like this one's kind of grown on me here. And this one's going to need to be darker still. So it's good and dry now. Just to make sure, I'll give it another hit with the dryer. And there is something that's going on here which you might have noticed and might not, it might bother you, because it bothers me sometimes, is that when I had a shadow on this side of the shell, and then I put the shadow beside, I didn't want a white sliver, so I inadvertently created an overlap. Those overlaps can be kind of distressing to many painters as you're painting, but they're quite easy to remedy. If I take a damp brush, blot it, and I took too much off the brush there, just a little bit damp, and I run it along that line and blot. So where I'm only hitting, the point of my brush is only hitting the overlap area. I can usually get rid of that overlap look. You can see I was able to get rid of that. So this one's still here. I'm not too worried about it, to be honest, but it's something I can share with you that you might find helpful when you get a dark line that you're not wanting. Like let's say here. Some of the dark line could also be graphite paper graphite if you have transferred very dark. So there's an argument for, especially when you're working on white subjects, don't transfer really dark. There's no covering it up, and once you get, even if you did it in pencil and you painted over it, once the graphite, like an ordinary pencil, gets wet on the paper, pencil lines get wet on the paper, it kind of dissolves the graphite and it goes into the paper. Then it becomes quite permanent, and you can't erase it at that point. So just a couple of things to keep in mind, but those little overlaps, they're easier to remedy than you think. All right. I used to worry about them, and I thought I was stuck with them, and I was afraid to do anything with them because I thought that would mess things up too much. But if I just keep the point, the very tip of my brush, on that line and keep blotting as I go along, I can usually get rid of any of those overlapping lines there. It works pretty well. Okay, so I enjoyed the portrait tour. Brazen Hearted saying, I enjoyed the portrait tutorials very much, as I hope to do a portrait of each of my very grown, middle-aged even, daughters this year for Christmas. Oh, well, Mum's the word, I won't tell. Feel free to return to those subjects soon. Okay. Yeah, I do try to bounce around with my subjects, trying to get lots of variety in my Wednesday morning demos so that there's something for everyone. Some of you might never attempt a portrait. I hope I've taken some of the fear out of it, but some of you might never attempt it because it's too scary. And it it all depends on where you are in your journey and your patience level, your painting temperament, all of that sort of thing. But I'm always encouraging people, don't let fear hold you back. If fear holds you back, you won't find out how good you can get at painting. So get brave. It's my suggestion. So I'm gonna set my brushes aside there. I guess I better move my lace out of the way before I get paint on it. There we go. So now, okay, so I'm going largest shapes, like up in here and the shell and so on. I'm going largest shapes to smaller shapes. And yes, there's more to do here, but let's concentrate on an area up here near the top. Otherwise, we're going to be here for a couple of days. And I bet you have other things to do today too. So now I am looking at things like the smaller sections. Okay, so I can come into some of these smaller sections and dampen. And I'm running out of color here, so I better mix up some more. It's a little too bright, so let's dull that down, but I'm shifting that gray into kind of a blue gray. And I need it much more diluted than this because I don't want to go too heavy-handed with these colors. Neutral tint, permanent rose. So the common thread here is the neutral tint is keeping these so that they'll kind of melt together very nicely, but also be a little bit of a darker value, which I need for some of the shadows. So dampening again, just because I think that may have dried. And there's a pretty dominant shadow. Now, I like to do this type of a thing where I'm holding my reference picture close by, especially on things that are complicated, because it's easy to get lost. So I'm going across here, and you can see I'm overlapping a little bit into my into these dark spaces, which I can do. I don't have to fuss too much. I can overlap into there because I do know that I need to go darker there anyway. But before I actually get into all the the little threads, if you will, of my lace, I'm just establishing my my shadows first off. So go right along here. I can feel that the paper's quite dry here, so I'm going to dampen it. And the reason I know it's dry is because it's giving me a really hard line, and I could just feel the paper grabbing the color and holding it in the spot that I touch. I actually want a little bit of a spread. I want to keep, the part of the beauty of lace is the softness, the implied softness here. And again, I've got a little bit of a hard line, so I'm just going to help it along before it gets sort of dry and set. And I want to talk, let me zoom in for this. I want to talk about these they're almost like crocheted pieces in between here, where it's like all threads wrapped around. So I'm going to just give you an idea of how I would approach that. All right, I'm going to dampen again. Now, because these are sort of round, like cylindrical, like little tubes, the first thing I want to do is create that roundness with the shadows. So I'm going to look for where the shadow is. Soften that. I didn't get it quite wet enough. And it may not always be where you expect. So by keeping, here, let me slide over. I'm going to slide right off the table here. So let's try it this way. Okay, so I'm looking here. And I see that this portion right here has a little bit of a light edge to the left. So you might expect it to be on the lower side, but the shadow is actually here. And I'm using pretty diluted color, and I think that's kind of an important element here is you need to keep it soft. If you want to keep it looking like lace, not rope, really harsh, kind of hard lines, that sort of thing. So I'm redampening some of this because I'm sure it's already dried. So I'm coming in here. And you can see why, I needed to do a lighter version in those holes first, because what was I going to say? Like as I go up against those, the paint would, if this were really dark, that extra paint on the paper, on the surface, most of this is soaked into the paper. So the majority of it is in the paper, and it's not going to move on me as I'm painting. So keeping the shadows in the right places is an important part of this. There's a lot of sort of twists and turns with lace. And I know some of you are thinking, oh my gosh, this is like so complicated. And it can actually be almost meditative if you're that type of a painter that doesn't mind working on details. It can be very meditative, but I do understand it may not be everybody's sort of cup of tea. I can spend days working on this kind of thing, just listening to music and just finding shadows. That's my painting personality. So I'm going to wet a little bit more. So I'm going to develop more this little corner here so that you can see where this goes. If when I've done all of that, if you're still interested in seeing more of the completion, I could continue this next week if you wanted to. But I'm giving you enough of an idea that you may not need to see it all. Start to finish. You can be sure I'll post it on my social media if you want to see the finished, but you may not need to watch the entire thing. It's very time consuming, can be anyway. That's giving me some pretty hard lines right there, so I'm just going to soften these up. All the wet stuff goes down first before any of the detail. So I'm trying to determine where it overlaps and where it stops. Like this one, this shadow here had to stop before I got to the big band of color. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little bit up in this area here where the lace and threads meet the fabric. Dampening it first. Now I can revisit any of this, just dampen it and repeat, basically. You know, so if it doesn't feel like it's sufficiently dark or I've missed some shadows, you just re-wet it after it's fully dry, of course, so that you don't disturb what you've already got on there. So you wait for it to fully dry, and then you can come in and build on that. So there's a little bit on the fabric here, just a little bit of a shadow. It's not much. Let's see if I can fold that over a little bit more. Again, if I hold it close to where I'm working, I tend to find subtle things that I might otherwise miss if I'm looking like a foot to the left and then back here to my picture. Information can be lost in that little short distance. Lots of little puckers and things, so working like lots of wet stuff in there is really helpful. Okay, and there's a series of little thread holes, if you will, along the edge of this area. You can see those little holes there, and they're indented. So it's giving a little bit of a rim. I'm getting kind of nitpicky here, aren't I? But I'm going to go into, not this part, it's really, really wet right in there. You can see it's really super shiny. And over here, you can see some of it's a little dry. I'm going into that with a blotted brush. Okay, so my brush isn't really wet, and I'm not picking up really wet color. By picking up drier color, I'll have a little bit more control. So I'm going to follow along where those threads, where those little stitching holes are. And I can switch it up, make it a little bit more red if I want to, or a little bit more purple, I guess. All right, so you can see, you all automatically get that feeling that there's a little bit of a round edge on that, right? Which is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that feeling of a rounded edge. So let's dry this, and I'm going to show you how I might develop some of the threads. Whoop. Okay, I have to leave that to cool down a bit. It's looking really dark again. Maybe it's because I'm zoomed in. Let me see if I can do a little adjustment here to the camera. I think that's better. Oh, it's almost a little too light now, isn't it? Oh, it's not too bad. Got to cool off anyway, so just give me a second while I'm doing this. Okay, so that's probably a little bit more reasonable. There we go. I don't know why it was getting so dark there, but cameras are weird. What can I say? All right, so now if I want to do the threads, I'll be working on dry paper. So there's a big difference. I've been doing a lot of wet on wet, and now I want to go to wet on dry. So when you go wet on dry, you have to make a shift. You have to mentally understand that you need to dilute the color much more when you're working on dry, because it's going to grab the dark color and it's going to hold it there, and you probably want to do some things that are a little bit more subtle. So I'm going to take some of this and really dilute it. And if I want any of the reddish color, I'm going to really dilute that as well. And I'm going to paint with highly diluted color because it's going to look a lot stronger. When you work on a wet surface, you've got the dilution of the paper surface. So it tends to really lighten up a lot of what you put down on the paper. So if I'm a little at all concerned about how dark my brush strokes are going to be, I'll start somewhere where I know it's going to be dark anyway. So I'm going to put some of those little holes along here. And I don't have to actually count them. I can just space them evenly, I think. I don't have to get too crazy about all this. Now let's do this band in here. Okay, so this band has a lot of stitches. Oh my goodness, tons and tons and tons of stitches. So I don't think I want to do it stitch by stitch. So what I'm going to do with my really diluted color is I'm going to just dabble. To give the illusion of that. Now, if I'm putting that down and it looks too strong, I can take a clean, dry paper towel, a light, very light tap, and that lightens right up. And so this, I'm a realistic painter, but this is enough to give the illusion and still look realistic. So while you're thinking, oh my goodness, there's like, that's going to be hours and hours and hours of work, it's really it'll go quite quickly. Some of that ran together. I'll just tap it. My paper towel. And this is just a tap, 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 tap. I don't even have to make it especially perfect or anything like that. And that's pretty subtle stuff. I can actually, revisit any of this if I want to show a little bit more texture or have a little bit more color, and don't have to blot all of it off. You can see I'm picking up about half of what I put down, and if you're doing it as you go along, it's surprising how much control you actually can get out of this. But it's very important that you only use a light tap with the paper towel, because pressing hard pushes the color into the paper faster than the paper towel can pick it up. And then it ends up being quite permanent there. And you may notice that I'm even switching up the shadow colors here, alternating from a reddish to a bluish kind of color. Is this negative painting? Not really. I'm creating the shadows. These holes are probably more negative painting than anything else, because these are letting the light strands show. I guess, you know, a lot of shadows do that, right? Where they end up showing the highlight through it. Now my brush is getting a bit dry, so I just dampened it again, picking up diluted color. Don't go too far before tapping with your paper towel, or it could actually get you know, permanent in there. Could soak in, and then you've got the whole issue. But you can see it can go along pretty quickly. But even though it's kind of quick and you can kind of get into a zone, if you will, you know, you can end up sort of go on autopilot. I wouldn't. I would keep looking at your reference picture, because there are going to be a number of things that can still be come across as a surprise. So I'm going to do some of those here. Even along edges. I find that there's almost a diagonal line that goes along the edge here. And again, that is sometimes overlapping into the dark area, which I'm going to darken more. But this does need to be significantly lighter than you think, like diluted wise, because I'm working on dry paper. And some of those are pretty strong shadows, so I'm not going to blot that one. I'm just going to let this soak in. It will dry lighter anyway, because it is watercolor after all. But even on these little strands that hold everything together, you know, there's light and shadow. There's form. It actually is round like my finger. You know, you can see that there's a shadow on my finger. And so each one of these little portions has some shadow on it. And depending on which direction it is sort of folding or moving, the shadows might come as a surprise. They may not be where you would necessarily expect them, especially if there's a little bit of a twist in the threads. And here we have some more of the wider band here starting. I have a little bit more, my paper's a little bit larger, so I have to kind of improvise a bit here. But tap with my paper towel. So hopefully you're seeing the development of these forms. All right, so little by little it starts to develop. I'm keeping it pretty subtle though, because it just has to be its lace. So it's got to be quite subtle in many places. I'm going to just sort of imply some a darker shadow right here. A little bit maybe up here. Just a little, it feels like that piece of the lace has a little bit more of a dip. And, and I can revisit any of these multiple times if I need to. If I just feel like, oh, it needs a little bit more or something like that, I can come back in and do a bit more to it. But I'm going to do a little bit. I'm going to expand the area that I'm working in here a little bit. And I'll do a little bit more. And then I want to revisit these darks here. Because these darks are going to give you the like the full value range, which start to really make this pull together and look a lot better. Right now it's looking a little bit homogeneous, I guess. And it feels... it doesn't feel finished, well, that's for sure. So I'm looking at, I'm always looking at my reference, like where's the direction of those stitches and that sort of thing. But it's not as like crazily detailed as a lot of people fear. I can give the impression, and it can look quite good, but it doesn't have to be as agonizingly detailed as what you think, or what people often think when they're looking at the reference picture. By the way, if you decide to try this one out, tag me. Tag me. If you're posting it on your Facebook or on your Instagram, will you tag me? I feel like sometimes people paint along with these and they, I miss it, and I don't want to miss it. I just, it may not come up on my feed because you know how weird the algorithm is these days. It shows you what it wants to show you, not necessarily what you want to see. So, there's kind of a lot of twists and turns on this one, so. I may have to trace a little bit here because I feel like I'm a little lost. So with my graphite, I can bring that back in. Once this is a bit drier, I can bring that back in and I can trace that in. That is the one thing that I can do. And you'll notice sometimes I'm using diagonal strokes. And that's because that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing diagonal type of strokes. The little threads, the weaving or whatever it is just coming across that way. But when you work on the dry, that's when you have to sort of change your method. You have to go a lot thinner with your color. So if you'd like me to sort of continue on with this next week, let's sort of show the completion. Now, what I wouldn't do, if I was doing this next week, I wouldn't make you sit through all of the like every part of the lace, because it's just too boring to watch. And it's all the same, right? Because, once you know. And, but if you'd like me to continue on, if there's something other than this that you'd like to see, I would like to know. So you can put that in the chat. Or, if you're watching the replay of this, you can put it in the comments and let me know what you'd rather see next week. So I'm looking at a couple of the little details through here, just little hints of those darks. And this is just a little bit more of the working on dry, but with highly diluted color. So it feels like my brush is like almost too wet to be doing details. And I think that's what people feel, is that, wait, when you're doing details, doesn't it mean that you need to have, less on your brush? And yeah, normally that is what you would think. But because we need this soft, it has to be a wet brush. But I'm just using the tip of my brush to give the illusion of what I'm needing to have on the paper here. I'm going to revisit some of those little holes along the side that can make them a little bit darker. Smaller dot because the actual pinhole is smaller than the shadow, that type of thing. And Auntie Patience, oh my gosh, first time to catch a live. Well, welcome. I'm glad you could make it. Yes, it does. It will take a lot of patience to do it this way, but remember at the end here, I'm going to show you kind of the even shorter way of giving the impression of this. But the important part here is I'm establishing shadow and light. It's all about shadow and light when it comes to painting, right? There's a lot of little holes in this portion here. Maybe I'll work this way so that you can see what I'm working on. There, I can do it that way. And sort of a lot of sort of crisscrossing lines here, diagonal one way and then overlapping another, and it feels more like a weave. Not worried about making it perfect. I just need the implication of it. And if I revisit and darken a few, it just feels a little bit more shaded, a little bit more shadow there. I'm kind of covering it with my hand, I think. But you'll notice I'm moving my hand often because I'm looking. I'm constantly looking. Understanding light takes practice. It's not something that, we naturally do. So it is something you do need to practice. Even if you're painting this kind of a little bit more loosely, more implied, then you need to still be looking at the light. Probably, maybe even more so, because when you are trying to imply it with fewer brush strokes, you really need to know where the light is. Now, it's very possible when I come in and darken the centers here, I might find that some of these areas are too light. I may discover that, but it's easier to add than it is to take away. So here we go. I want you to notice that, in this printout, even though it's a color printout, a lot of these shadows are looking really gray. They're really gray, and I really have alternated or switched out the gray for some color. So I'm going to take that neutral tint. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, these look pretty black. I could add some color to it if I want to. Over here, if I took and wanted to make it a little more reddish, I could. We'll end up kind of feeling purple, but it's mostly just full strength neutral tint without a lot. You do need some water in it, but not a lot if you're looking for really dark. And I'm going to darken these. You know, if I'm feeling that this is mostly finished, I'm given time, I might feel like, oh, this needs more, but I wanted to get on with it and give you the whole process. But if I revisit these now and darken them, this lace is going to look brighter, and it could be why the camera is struggling a bit too. It doesn't have a dark value to give it context. And so when you don't have a dark value, sometimes the camera can struggle. Same as if it's just like a piece of white paper. The camera's like fighting to get the right value. So I'm coming in here with these darks, and boy, this will make a much bigger impact. And I'm not trying to do perfect shapes because it's not perfect. It's threads and things like that. So it's not going to be all smooth edges. Like if you make it look too cardboard cutout, it won't feel integrated with the stitching that you have. So I'm trying not to make it too smooth along the lines here. I think that won't feel normal. I actually have done a number of full-length demos, so if you really kind of think, oh, that looks like it's going to be fun to do, but I might need a little bit of extra help getting through the whole process, you'll see that I have a number, at least I have at least a few demonstrations of lace subjects in my recorded videos, which are full length. You'll get a line drawing, you'll get reference picture, progress photos, and lifetime access to the video. And those can be found on my website right here, shelleypryor.com, under recorded videos. And I have 4 pages of them, so I have well over, I think I've got well over 100, maybe 200. I don't know. I lost track. You might find something else there you like too. But this now the lace doesn't feel so sort of smooshed together and too much like the holes and that sort of thing. And it's feeling a little bit more lacy. Of course, the darker color does actually emphasize the lace even more. And I may need to come in and build up a little bit, but it's pretty good. Like I don't think I need to adjust too much here. There are a couple of like little holes where you'll really have to kind of get up on the tiptoe of the brush. Might need a little more shadow in that little section there, but so this gives a pretty good impression, even though a lot of that was just dabbling for the texture in through here. But very intentional dabbling. I mean, I didn't want to just do it randomly. I'm constantly checking my reference as I go along. And now what about these little ones in the middle here? I think I'll do a little bit right through here so that you can sort of get a better sense of that. going to go back to my little dabbled stitches, if you will. Let's blot that so it's not too strong. Excuse me. So you can layer these up, all these little stitch shadows, if you will. So there's a lot through here, and it gets a little complex, I guess. So I'm just dabbling in here, and now just to show you what I would do to sort this out, I'm going to zoom out just for a moment. Okay, so you can see the little registration marks. I'm going to line this up to the corner right here and here. And at the bottom of my page here, right? So I've got it in the exact place. Actually, what I better do is dry it before I do this. Okay, if I had my tape handy, I would tape that along the top, but I don't have it handy, so I'm just going to hold it in place. Place my graphite paper underneath, because one thing when you start getting a lot of texture on there, it can get confusing. For doing lace or crystal or something like that, you can get lost pretty easy. So I'm going to do these little marks here. I'm going to press a little harder because it's going to be a little harder for me to see these on a textured area. So I'm just going to press a little harder it'll make the graphite a little bit darker. Hopefully I can see that. Still holding it in place. Yep, it's tricky to see, but okay. There we go. So I'm going back to my very dark color here, and I'm going to find all of these little pockets, and if I get it a little bit wrong, it'll be implied well enough that it would be it would give the right impression. I mean, we can go. I'm not a hyper realist. I do like realism, but I don't have the patience for hyper realism. So I am just close is good enough. Like the saying goes, like hand grenades and horseshoes. Close is good enough. I have no idea where that expression came from. It's kind of a weird one. All right, so I've got the little holes implied. They're not perfect. They're not organized, and honestly, it's a dollar store lace. Even if you look closely at lace, it's not as perfect as it looks at a distance. I mean, if it's machine made, it looks pretty convincing, pretty accurate. But there we go. So now, if I kind of hide all of this. This feels pretty dimensional. I would be able to continue along with the entire rest of this, as long as I'm paying attention to, there's some lighter areas down here, don't fill all of that in. This would end up looking pretty substantial. Just before I go any further with lace, though, I think I would like to reestablish some of these lines on the shell here. And they look like they're kind of this original color. This was the raw sienna mixed with a bit of purple. Will give me a toned down, that looks pretty yellowy right there, but if I add a little bit of that purple to it, it gives it a better, a more natural feel, a little darker, but also a little less yellowy. But again, if I'm working on, before when I did these lines, I did it on wet, in order to make them feel soft. Now I want to do some lines that look a little stronger, so I'll be working on dry, which means I have to dilute my color. That's one thing that you just kind of have to get your head around and try to remember, is that when you're working on dry, you've got to go lighter with all these values, because they will end up being very, very strong. So I'm going to start in the shadow area just in case my brush is a little too dark. And that's probably dark enough. And you can see that those little ribs, I guess you might call them ribs on the shell, look wider at the bottom. Now I'm still using the same brush. Feel free to switch to something more like a liner brush for this type of thing. Kind of holding my breath as I do this, but anytime you're concentrating on small lines and details, you tend to forget to breathe. And I'm going to go thinner and maybe just a little bit more raw sienna in as I come into the light. Colors are sort of less dull as they come into the light. Just prior to coming into the light, colors are usually at their peak in terms of color intensity, or not. Like the hue is more pure. And you'll see the colors a little bit stronger. Now, as we're coming over to the left side, my brush this paint has to get even lighter, because I'm going from one side to another. And I've seen this many times in my classes, autopilot, and you just paint them all on there, and forgetting that you're going from dark to light. So you've got to really, I started off thin to begin with, but now I'm like mostly just water. Just hardly any color in my brush whatsoever, because I'm coming into the light, and the light's kind of blasting out all that shadow. The ribs are actually starting to face the light, so you don't see them so much. So much lighter as it comes over to the right hand side. I would probably develop this even more. And of course, I don't have any of the little, like there's little holes and things in this. But I do think that this side can use a little bit more color, like a little bit more shadow. Excuse me. Actually, I don't want that quite so dark right there because there's some reflected light, so I'm going to lift some of that back up. The darkest area seems to be a little bit more in from the edge. And along the back here, I noticed that this portion along the back seems to be a lot darker as well. So I'm going to blend that in. So clean water here, just blend some of that in. And I can sort of work, I am putting kind of wet over top of something that I detailed, but you may have to do some adjustments like that as you go along. And as long as the underlayers are dry, you should be able to build that up. In fact, that's even going to soften these little lines a little bit more. Okay, so it starts to feel a little bit more in shape. I'm blotting my brush and smoothing these things in as much as I can. Okay, I kind of feel like maybe I want to bring some white paint in there later, but for now I just want to get the shell feeling like it's got more shape to it. There, it's feeling a little bit more shell-like now, and I think I need to darken this down a little bit more as well to fit in. And that's kind of how I work, a little bit back and forth. But the big thing for me is adjusting all the values, getting those correct as I go along. And so this little part here is starting to feel a little more developed. I would want to darken this shadow up here because I'm not feeling the actual crease in this upper part. So I want to make sure my brush isn't quite as wet so it doesn't spread so far. I'm giving my brush a bit of a blot. Now you notice I'm putting a secondary shadow, like they're leaving a little bit of a light ridge. You can see this little light ridge there, that reflected light. I want to try to describe that with what I'm putting on here. that was kind of heavy. But my brush is getting drier and drier as I go along here, just so that I am not losing control of the shadow. I need it darker. I know it will dry lighter, but I need it darker to start with. And that way I can build that up to feel like it's actually got more of a stronger pucker, if you will. Now doing that, I may have to come back, as I said, to revisit some of these areas here. Now these I'd be working on dry, so I'll have to dilute the brush a little, dilute the paint, I should say, a little bit more. But you see that every time I darken something, it has a little bit more shape to it. So it's a little bit of a push-pull. Diane says she found the brushes. Wonderful. Are there large transversal lines on the shells too in the picture? If you're talking about the highlights there, there are highlights. That's why I said I might come back in with a bit of white there. I may develop the shadows a little bit stronger once this dries. And one thing I am noticing is that my little shadow along the bottom here has kind of vanished because it got a little bit too soft. So I'm just going to put a little bit of strength in there. Put some of the red as well. And now I'm going to smooth this out. I don't want to put any of the details on this until I have the overall color of the lace, that shadow value on here looking right. That feels even more dimensional. So every time I kind of build up the shadows, even though it's a white subject, you can build up those shadows and they just get a little more realistic. I find too many people just stop short and doesn't have that. Now let's revisit this one that I did, and you'll see I've used very much the same technique. Now this one I used a little bit more brown, and it was the lighting and the reflecting color from other things in the room and stuff like that. But you can see I used a similar type of technique here. I don't know, maybe it was the same piece of lace, but you can see it's pretty subtle in some areas where it's really bright. In the shadow areas, I put the wash underneath so that I created the form before I actually started putting the detail on. Anyway, this could go on for a very long time, but it is now noon here, and we've been painting, or I've been painting for 2 hours, and that's as far as I've gotten. But I will read through all the comments here just to make sure, see if you guys are wanting to continue this next week. But you may have some other ideas, what you'd like to see instead of this. I know somebody said wouldn't mind seeing some more portrait things, but yeah, so Renee says, I appreciate the close-ups and the design next to it. Yes, that's partly for your benefit, but mostly for mine, because if I'm holding this really close by, I can see whether or not I'm on track, right? So that's feeling very much like my reference picture here now, at least in certain portions of it anyway. But like the left side of the shell is looking right. Now if I compare the right side of the shell, I think I can go, well, I'm actually fairly close, I guess, value-wise. I'm not too far off. But as I come into here, I want to make sure I've got the underpainting here at the correct value. Probably could be even a little bit darker now that I'm seeing it sort of side by side. Trying to do that all before I put in all the little dabbles of stitching that I'm going to put on there. But slowly, little by little, this does build up, and I do think I need more shading. Well, I have no shading here basically, but I want to put more shading in here for sure, through here, and in these little tight corners. And there's a lot of this finer lace. It actually has quite a bit of shadow on it too. So before I get carried away with that, I probably would do the little holes with the neutral tint before putting a lot of those shadows on, because it's really hard to transfer when you have pattern on there. It makes it really hard to see the graphite lines. So this is one of the reasons I mask, or not mask. That's one of the reasons that I darken all of these little pinhole, like these little holes in the lace, before doing anything else. Feel like I'm missing some here. So I would do all of these little holes, even if you're only doing it light to start with. It makes it a lot easier to sort things out once you get all the little dabbles on the lace on there. You never find these little light lines you've transferred or drawn. They're really hard to find after that. So it's best to try and get those in before doing all the dabbling. It's a lot better. So let me just scroll back quickly. I'm going to see if there's any questions that I might have missed. You would like to see my method of painting lilacs realistically this spring. Interesting. I actually was working, not on lilacs, but what are they called? Hyacinths? So I was working on something like that here. Just doing it really quick. Little demo there. Lilacs would be a good option for spring. We don't have any yet, but coming up, that would be a good option for sure. And because that's one subject you really have to learn to simplify. Margot says, we'll use some of my grandmother's lace fabric for a variants of whole patterns, etc., which will make the painting for love of family. That's so nice. I'm scrolling backwards, so I may not be reading these in order. If I haven't answered your question, if you wouldn't mind just copying it into the chat again, so that I don't miss it. Reach for the moon, fellow painters. Even if you fall short, you get to mingle with the stars. That's so nice. Okay, so Renee says she'd like to see the painting done. Okay, so I will slowly read back through all of the chat. I'm a slow reader, so it takes me a while, but I will definitely read back through all of that. And is this the regular printer paper size? Yep, this is 8.5 by 11 printer size. This finished painting would be a little smaller. Like I would trim off a little bit with the matting. So it would end up to be like an 8 by 10 would be a good. You can find a ready-made mat if it's 8 by 10. It's a standard size, so for sure. All right. So a lot of you are saying to continue, so I might do that. Sometimes I do a two-week thing, but I will do a lot of the little dabbles. I mean, that's just very time-consuming, can be slow. So I will continue along there. Maybe I might even do like what do they call it? A speed video, like a time lapse is what I was looking for. Okay, so with that, I will say thank you so much for joining me, and send me all your suggestions. If you enjoyed this one or any of my other videos, make sure you subscribe or like or whatever you like to do. And we will see you again next week, and enjoy your Valentine's Day this week, and we will see you next time.